On this episode of Dead Last, we're switching up the format, just a little bit. We are ranking the top horror films of 2020, and when I say top, I mean highest grossing, as you're about to find out that when you only have theaters open for about 3 months, well, let's just say the cream doesn't exactly rise to the top. I mean, it was a rough year all around and not exactly a tentpole year for horror. So, here's the movies that we're going to be taking a look at, and instead of my usual panel of 3 or 4 people, I've invited my patrons to join in the discussion, and we'll be meeting them as we talk about the movies. This list is calculated from the rankings of 29 different people, from their favorite to their dead last, so our lowest possible score would be 10, and the highest possible would be 290. Just a quick note that you too can be a part of the rankings by becoming a patron on patreon.com. I should point out that since the movies on this list are a little bit more recent than the other episodes, you should be aware that there's going to be lots of spoiler talk for pretty much all of these movies. And so then, without further ado, let's get to the rankings. Coming in at dead last with a whopping 258 points is The Turning, released back in January. It was ranked dead last 10 times, and its highest ranking was 6th place. One person ranked it 6th. One of the people that ranked it dead last was our first panelist, TJ Leuken, who is a patron and horror fan, and he loves him some vinyl.
I do, yes, hello.
Welcome to the panel, and I hope you're ready to talk some horror.
I am always.
Well, you definitely did not care for this movie.
I'm gonna, right off the bat, one of the keys to their marketing campaigns was a scene that was not in the movie. The thing coming out of his mouth, the spider-like creature coming out of the kid's mouth, not in the movie. That bothered me. Secondly, I just feel like, I got a lot of the concept of what it was trying to do. I love haunted kid movies, and the adaptation of The Turning of the Screw, I've loved that kind of movie ever since I saw The Innocents way back. So, it's been done before, and it's been done really well. And I liked some of the style and the direction, but it went nowhere. And we ended up with a movie about powdered-faced ghosts that really have very little explanation, and then it just abruptly ends. And I think you're supposed to figure out what the twist is. I feel like there could have been 5 different twists. I was going back trying to figure out what it could have meant at the end. And then I realized that I didn't care.
Our next panelist is from the YouTube channel Hamburgers and Horror. Welcome aboard, Noah Hook.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Tell us about your channel, Noah.
Yeah, it's a pretty new channel. I started this summer in quarantine, and I started with the whole Hellraiser series, going through that list of terrible movies, and now I am, ranking different horror movies and hamburgers.
Well, you also really didn't like The Turning, as you ranked it a 9.
Yeah, well, the Turning was just really disappointing, especially the ending. You go through this decent ending, and then it just flashes back to these drawings from the random mentally ill mother that has no point or purpose in the plot aside from to deliver these Deus Ex Machina drawings that also just don't do anything, and that doesn't make sense. I thought the kid acting was very good, obviously Finn Wolfhard, but I thought the little girl did do a good job, but that was like the only bright spot in the movie for it. The rest of it was just an inferior version of Bly Manor, which I kept comparing it to because I had just watched it before this, and the ghosts really didn't serve a function. They were just here every once in a while, and it just kind of seemed like it wasn't quite a finished film.
Our next ranking comes from panelist and producer for Practical Matters Film Studio. Welcome, Brennan Kellar.
Oh, glad to be here. So Practical Matter Films was created a few years ago in a small town in Minnesota. And just recently we learned that one of our documentary films found its way onto pirated websites. So that's a big step in the right direction, I'd say.
You actually had one of the more favorable rankings of this film, placing it at number 7.
I don't know if I want to say I desperately wanted to like the movie, but before it came out, they released the soundtrack, and it's my most listened to original soundtrack of 2020. That's the one thing I want to recommend. Mackenzie Davis is a really talented actress, and so is the directing is really, really well done. It's a really good-looking film, but there's just some problems. There's some real talent behind it, but I put it at 7, but all the stuff away from the movie itself ended up bringing it that high up.
My personal rating for this one was an 8, and there's really not much to like. I'd rank it lower, but to be honest, it just didn't leave enough of an impact on me one way or another. The problem with the whole film is just how incredibly bland that everything is, and there's not one single thing that we haven't seen before. This movie's like, you know those AI song generators where they take a whole bunch of different pop songs and then they put them into a computer and it analyzes them and churns out some kind of weird amalgam of them? This is that, but with a bunch of other horror movies, like a bunch of things that you've seen before, but duller. Someone who gave it a 9 was our next panelist, Thom Wade, whose art you can check out on Instagram because it is really great stuff. And also he has a podcast called My Nameless Podcast dedicated to mostly geeky stuff, which can be heard where?
Spotify, right now, Spotify, Anchor, and then Anchor has distributed it to like 7 other places I've never heard of.
So you really didn't like this one though.
I hated this experience. I did not enjoy watching this at all. And I feel bad saying that about somebody's work because, hey, it would suck if people were if I made something that people were going, yeah, that's terrible. But it just bored me to tears. And I wasn't really as impressed by, I feel like Finn Wolfhard was better in It. And the little girl was creepy, but I just kind of felt like nothing compelled me to want to get to the end and get the answers in it. I was so bored in that movie. And then the twist is just like the extra twist of the knife. I'm like, I never ever want to watch that movie again.
So then at number 9 with 221 points, it was the new Grudge movie, which had the distinction of being the first horror movie of 2020, which may be its only distinction. It was ranked dead last 6 times, although it was ranked highly a few times, with its top score being 3rd place. I didn't rank it that high though, as it was also number 9 for me, and a lot of the things that I said about the turning, I think can kind of just be applied here. Much of the movie is incredibly forgettable and takes very little inspiration from the series it's supposed to be a part of. John Cho is pretty much wasted, as is most of the cast for that matter, and the only reason I ranked it lower than The Turning is that it was billed as a remake and reboot, only for them to announce at the last minute that it was in continuity with the originals, and then that fact doesn't even matter. It throws away most of the originals anyway and is barely connected, so it felt silly for them to have even bothered. Our next panelist is Nick Wical, who is a patron and horror fan. Welcome aboard.
Hey Josh, thanks for having me. We're happy to be here.
And it looks like you've got someone watching over you there.
I do. That's Chucky. I'm a huge fan of Chucky. I like almost any killer doll sort of film because I think they're just inherently creepy no matter what they are.
Well, this one was your dead last.
I think I fell asleep a few times during it. Like, it felt like there was nothing happening. So much of it was just generic and like recycled sort of types of scenes. I was like, there's nothing new here to interest me. Like I feel bored. I felt no investment in any of the characters. Yeah. There's no new like sort of like twist or different way of doing like the like original Grudge storylines or effects. And it was just I felt like someone got lazy and was like, I'm gonna call this the Grudge and throw in a couple of things that sort of are reminiscent of it, and then I'm just gonna walk away. Yeah. And then like they got bored halfway through and just like let someone else do it. And so I was like, I can't.
Next up is Dan Guarnieri, who is a patron and is also known as the Horror Library Guy.
To no one, really, but to me.
Well, welcome aboard, Dan.
Thanks, Josh.
You were actually the highest ranking for this film, giving it 3rd place. What stood out in this one for you?
I enjoyed the effects were good. I thought the acting was good. I thought I was convinced by a lot of what they were doing there. I liked that they went with the idea of taking, instead of just remaking or telling a foreign horror story, they sort of brought it back to America in a way that might make you more fearful as an audience. Like, this isn't just something that happened in a foreign land that's easy for me to distance myself from. But if I was scared of ghosts or ghost stories, this is in America. And it's so much so that now it's a transportable horror. I liked that character, that female detective. I thought she was really good, actually. I liked that it was a female cop rather than your typical whatever psychology major female character they might throw into a horror movie. I thought I felt it was fresh.
Well, Brennan, you disagree, as this one was also your dead last.
It was January 3rd, January 2nd, 2020, when I said, it's a new year. There's one film out in the movie theater. Let's start off the year. I went to see The Grudge, and it's never going to make it out of my bottom 5 of 2020. One of the characters says something like, how could something like this happen? And when they said that, I wanted to turn to the person next to me and say, how could a movie like this happen? But of course there was nobody next to me because I was the only person watching the film. I thought the directing was competent. I thought the actors were competent, but it's a horror movie that isn't scary.
Next up at number 8 with 216 points is Brahms The Boy 2, the sequel to the 2016 film. It was given dead last honors 4 times, and its highest ranking was number 2, actually, and that ranking was from panelist Nick Wical.
I'm a big sucker for any sort of weird killer doll film, because I think almost inherently there has to be some good atmospheric stuff happening in order to make it creepy, and I think the movie does a really good job with that. The doll itself looks creepy. The straight porcelain face, he doesn't move. He's found in sort of weird circumstances. They break his head open at some point, and it's an actual skeleton head. And they really caught me off guard. It's like, oh shit, there's something else actually happening here, and like that I think really took over the top for me. It's like, that's a different twist than what you normally see. I mean, I think story-wise, probably not the greatest story, but I think some of the elements between the doll and the scenes and that creepy skeleton head at the end, really just did it for me. So for that, I put it pretty high.
And new to the panel now is longtime horror fan and patron Shannon. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Josh. Thank you so much for having me on the panel. Again, love horror movies. I'm looking forward to talking about some of the best and mostly worst of 2020, I think, as far as horror movies, so I'm glad to be here.
This one's pretty low for you, too. It's your number 9.
One of the things I think The Boy 2 did that totally ruined it for me was it took away that suspense. It took away that element of what's really happening, and you really, as the audience even, were privy to, say, the doll, Brahms' head turning and looking, and you actually saw the motion. So, like when Katie Holmes' character is looking out of the window watching the kids play croquet, she sees the doll's head turn, and so do we as the audience. If they'd done more of a cut to the doll looking one way and cut back and it's looking another way and left it more ambiguous of is this really happening, maybe I would have liked it more. But they totally went supernatural with it and went all out as the movie progressed. And so for me, that completely undid anything that the first one did right and just did all of it wrong. And I think, we were looking at Annabelle movies gone crazy, some really bad movies with haunted dolls. We have plenty of those. And so I think they just jumped on that craze as opposed to really paying attention to why the first one worked. I'm going to put that in quotations.
I gave this one 7th place, and this is another one that suffers from what affected so many of these films, and that's just the general meh-ness of it all. There's not a whole lot to like, but not enough to make fun of either. It's just kind of there. The first one at least had the twist at the end, and like it or not, at least it switched up the game a bit. This one doesn't have that, and at the ending of it all, it's just another Annabelle-esque kind of thing, and guess what? I don't really care for those either.
When I heard that they were making a sequel to The Boy, I was surprised I really actually enjoyed The Boy the first time I watched it. I, for whatever reason, didn't see the twist coming that Brahms is a man living in the walls, and like I really enjoyed that twist. And then I was just so confused as to them completely switching it up and making it a supernatural movie when that the whole point of the first one was it wasn't. So I don't know where Brahms went. I know that it's supposed to be like Joseph is the one who rebuilt the doll at the end, but it very clearly was something that they decided when they decided they wanted to make a sequel of it. And I don't know what's going on with Brahms's weird little meat face when they smash him. I don't know what that's about. And it's just a weird way to continue the series, and it seems like a way for them to try to make more sequels in the future out of it, as opposed to just leaving it where it was as one good singular movie.
Just a few points ahead of that one is number 7 at 212 points, and it's Fantasy Island. This horror reboot of the classic 70s TV show racked up 4 dead last rankings, but, like Brahms, also had a number 2 ranking, and the rankings for this one were a little more all over the place than the others. One of the dead last rankings came from new panelist Mike Forshaw, hanging from Canada. Glad to have you here, Mike.
Hey, thank you very much, Josh. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
I'm digging the Blade Runner poster.
Yeah, director's cut, final cut. I don't know which one's best, but yeah, one of my all-time favorite movies, man. You can't knock Blade Runner.
Well, this one was a miss for you since it was your dead last.
It had a good idea behind it. I mean, it'd be fair to say there's a good idea somewhere in here, but it was just so sloppily executed. I hated this film. I don't think there are any other films on this list I actually hated, but I hated this one. I thought the writing was terrible, full of goofy one-liners and pop references. The yippee-ki, yes.
Oh, yippee-ki, yes, please.
I didn't care for that. Dull. Maggie Q, I thought, was probably the best actor in the film. I thought she was maybe the one that walked away with the most dignity. But her story was boring. It was cool seeing Michael Rooker show up, probably the best thing about the film, in a crazy cameo. Yeah, not good. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, actually, and that's why it is my dead last.
Now let's go to patron and longtime fan of the channel, Stephen Bell. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Hello.
You also gave this one dead last.
It's one of those movies I'm like, how did this happen? It's just, how did, like, people paid for this? I mean, first of all, it's a really ugly movie. Like, the color grading on it is terrible. Like, the pool party scene was, like, physically hurting me to look at because the colors were so bright. And it was just bad. I genuinely don't know what to say about it because it was just a really bad movie. Like, there's other movies that I watched that were more boring, but that was just really painful to sit through.
Now, Shannon, you gave this one a 7, which is where it landed on the ranking.
Yes, Fantasy Island. I think this was another one that I went into and really low expectations, and it didn't necessarily do better than my expectations, but it didn't do worse. I think the one thing I couldn't get around in it was how bad the acting was. Example, when they're in the cave and they have the big reveal of who the villain is or who the mastermind behind this evil plot was, it was like almost no reaction. Even when Lucy Hale's character got drug back by the person popping out of the water, none of them looked really stunned or shocked. And then transition to the next scene, which is almost directly after it. They're all getting ready to leave the island, and he's like, "I just wish my brother would be back and alive." And his brother died in the movie, pretty gruesomely. And the guy's brother, who they all saw die, but turns around and looks at them and says, "Oh, he's not coming." And they don't even look fazed, at all. Like, dead guy, alive, on the plane, your other friend's staying for forever. I'll go with that. Okay, let's move on.
Well, let's get to a more favorable review, and for that we'll introduce the professor himself, Professor Horror Movie Syllabus, from the YouTube channel Horror Movie Syllabus. Tell us about that, Professor.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me. I'm Professor Victor of the Horror Movie Syllabus. The Horror Movie Syllabus is a chart of the horror genre split up into 100 separate subgenres with 3 movies representing each subgenre, and the caveat being that you can't repeat any movies. And my channel just goes through one subgenre every video and invites other people to tell me how wrong I am, basically.
So you gave this movie 4th, so you don't think this one is too terrible then?
I actually do think it's kind of terrible, but that's a bit why I like it so much. At some point, that movie went from being interesting to bad to phenomenally bad to I'm just having fun because it's so bad. And I think that moment was probably the twist. When the twist happened, I saw the twist coming. I said, please tell me they're not going to do one of these cheating twists where Lucy Hale has been pretending the entire time to us, the audience, that she's a good person. And they did it. And at that point, I decided to just kind of, stop worrying and enjoy love the bomb. It's ludicrously stupid, and I don't think it's trying to be. I think it's trying to actually be clever, and I don't think it's meeting that objective at all. But if you just enjoy it, if you just kind of let yourself go and embrace the stupidity of it, it's a great time. And if I was ranking these movies as to which ones I had the best time watching, I had to rank that pretty high because I had a lot of fun with it, even though not for the reasons I think they meant.
I actually gave this one its 6th place myself because at least it gave me something to remember. So much of these entries were just kind of bland and unmemorable, but Fantasy Island was ridiculous enough to stand out. It wasn't good by any stretch of the imagination, but it at least kept my attention, and it had me laughing at some parts, even if it was unintentional. I'll also give it the tiniest bit of credit for actually having one of the better representations of a gay character in a mainstream horror film. It's never a punchline, and it's barely a plot point, and the only reason it comes up is that instead of a gaggle of bimbos, his fantasy is a gaggle of himbos. So now a big jump in points takes us to number 6 at 137 points with The Wretched, one of the films on this list that came out post-quarantine and cleaned up at the drive-ins. It's the first film on the list so far to get no dead last rankings, and is also the first one to get ranked in the top spot, as one person did rank at number 1. And although it's not his number 1, let's go to Josh Weaver from the YouTube channel Camp Blood Media for news and info on horror films and horror fan films.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Josh. I'm Josh from Camp Blood Media. I do, like Josh said here, I do videos about fan films. More recently, I've done videos on Friday the 13th Roseblood, which features the return of Leuken from Friday the 13th New Blood. So that might be something people find interesting. I did videos on Charles. I did a video on the new Evil Dead game that just came out. So I kind of try to do a little bit of everything. I'm waiting for the bigger horror movies to come back out so I can start making videos on like Halloween Kills and the new Candyman and stuff like that.
You've got this one pretty high. It's your number 2.
Well, I went into it not knowing anything about it. I hadn't even seen a trailer, nothing. I just was going off the list that you put out. And it really pleasantly surprised me. Like, I thought that the witch, I think it was what it was in the movie, I thought that was really well designed. I thought it was creepy how it would like crawl out of things' bodies and get inside of other people. And I just thought the plot line of like people disappearing and then their family members forgetting them was really cool. Like, I just thought it had a lot of really cool elements that worked for me in the movie. And the ending, I won't specifically say what happens at the very end, but when he takes the flower and looks at it and he realizes that it's not a real flower and then it cuts to another character, I was like, oh, like that was kind of what sealed it for me. As being like my number 2 was that ending, because I just thought it was a nice like twist to have right at the end after everything that had gone on with the creepy witch throughout the movie.
The Wretched was, I guess you'd say something like the drive-in darling of the summer. It had like 6 or 7 weeks at the top of the box office, making 60, 70 grand for the weekend, but it was still number 1. It's the Pierce brothers. I think were the directors and the writer there, and I think they did just a really well done as the head of this low budget project. Good, interesting villain, takes over people's minds, makes them forget, and then they steal the people that are forgotten. I thought it was a really interesting story. There's some parts that a lot of people didn't like about how the main character is the teenager, so he does all the teenager stuff, like goes to parties, fights with the dad, the girlfriend situation. But overall, I think The Wretched is just one of the best on this list for sure.
Now, Professor Victor, you actually put this one pretty low, though. You had it as your number 9.
It does pain me a little bit to mark it as low as I did, because I don't think it's exactly a bad movie. I think it had a tremendous amount of potential. I just felt like it squandered some of that potential, or kind of left it either on the cutting room floor or just never got around to filming it. All these things I thought were interesting threads that I would have liked to have seen explored a little bit more, and I don't know if they just didn't have the budget for it, or if it wasn't something that they just felt like it had enough room for in their running time. But I felt like the movie kind of rushed through some things, and I thought there was some pretty good setup there that I wouldn't have minded seeing that followed out or played out a little bit more. The other reason why I wound up pushing it down the list was because I didn't click with the actor playing the main kid. He just didn't work for me. Like, the story was good. I thought it was filmed really well. I really would have liked to put it a little bit more towards the middle of the pack, but that performance of that kid really bothered me. I don't know what it was. I can't put my finger on it. It wasn't exactly that he was a bad actor. I just didn't like him, but I'm supposed to like him. And that was a little bit tough. And it's a tough thing to put it so low, because there are some really good scenes. I really like the whole play with the neighbor, and how the neighbor all of a sudden doesn't remember that he has a kid. And I like that scene where they go up to the front door and everything. There's some really cool scenes in there that really worked for me and had me engaged. And then it never felt like it fully came together. So maybe I'm a little harsher on it than I should have been, but because it had potential to be rather good in my mind and didn't quite stick the landing or didn't quite come together, I pushed it down a little farther over something like, say, The Grudge, that I didn't really have much expectation of it being good to begin with.
I actually really dug this one. I ranked it number 4, but I will say that I never really loved it. There's a ton of great setup without a lot of payoff. It does have some great character work, and the best part is that we actually do get pretty invested in our main characters, but overall it really doesn't do enough to really make a big impact. Really close in score is number 5 with 135 points, so only 2 points separating The Wretched from The Host, the streaming darling of the year. It actually did get one dead last ranking, and 2 people ranked it in their top spot, and this was another one where the numbers were just like all over the place. Now, for more info on that number 1 ranking, let's go to friend of the channel and big time horror fan, it's Uncle Pete.
Hey everyone.
Now this was your number 1, so you've got a lot of love for this one.
Yeah, I think because of quarantine, not the movie, but this 2020 quarantine we're all living with now, Zoom became very popular. A lot of people working at home and everything, so everyone became very familiar with Zoom calls. And the fact that the directing was done via Zoom, and all the acting was done in front of somebody's laptop or phone, it makes it felt like a real Zoom call that we've all learned to experience this year. So you felt like you were on there watching it. And the characters were natural. It wasn't the typical Hollywood studs and, beautiful princess girls. It was normal looking women on there, that would be your neighbor or your sister or your friend. So it felt very natural. And I didn't see a lot of the jump scares coming. Somewhere you're waiting for and it comes, you see stuff in the background. Like I said, you felt you were in a Zoom call with your friends watching it. And I thought all the actresses did great. And that jump scare at the end, I literally jumped off the couch. You knew it was coming, but it was timed so well. Yeah, I really enjoyed Host. That's why I put it as my number 1.
TJ, you had this one a bit lower as your number 6.
Yeah, I think Host is one of the movies that unfortunately the hype monster kind of ruined for me a little bit. I went into it expecting, I think, more than I was realistic for the movie to do, given the confines of how it was directed, I suppose. But having seen Unfriended and Unfriended 2, it's not something that, to me, hadn't been done before. The way that it was done was new, but the actual concept of having an entire movie take place on a computer screen had been done before to me. And so I was expecting something maybe a little bit more groundbreaking. I think they did a great job, but at the end, I feel like I saw a lot of CGI ghosts that I wasn't a big fan of, and it was a lot of jump scares. I think my expectations were something new that I'd never seen before, and I ended up with a mix of a couple things that I had seen before, done pretty well, but just nothing new for me.
I actually had this one as my number 5, and I have to admit it's not a strong 5. I had some high expectations for this film, and I think out of the whole movies shot over a webcam genre, it's definitely one of the better entries, and it builds an atmosphere pretty well given its limitations, but let's face it, the story is pretty much non-existent, and the logic just doesn't play any part in the film. At no part does anyone just leave the call, and the ending completely upends the whole why are they even still filming this thing that permeates a lot of found footage horror films. It's worth a watch, but ultimately didn't hit the spot for me.
They do such an effective job of using the Zoom format. The host actually gets really creepy and scary at points, and I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting it to be, okay, yeah, we've seen this kind of thing before. It's going to be jump scares, but no, they would do things like where all of a sudden what you think is the person walking around in the background of their shot is actually just a Zoom background, and all of a sudden something hits the camera and you suddenly see this warped face coming through the background, and it's okay, it was just jarring, but I thought they did a great job, and by the end just kind of going, okay, am I gonna just be so freaked out? Because I watched it at 2 a.m. in the dark.
But I really think they made a really impressive use of the technology to make something that had some really solid creepy moments in it, even though they're all just on Zoom or on some sort of mobile device. And for that alone, I was it's pretty good. It felt a little short on character development, but I felt some investment in sort of each of them, and the way that they sort of brought in the spirit or / ghost, and how they kind of found him or whenever it came out. And then after that, I thought this is an innovative way to do a film. I guess it's short, and I think were in another 30 minutes, they could have definitely done a little bit more deeper dive into the whole seance thing and to each of the characters. But overall, I was this is a pretty good film for being less than an hour and relying primarily on Zoom to film it.
So now with 128 points at number 4, we find The Hunt, the controversial film that spent about 1 week in the theaters before being one of the first films to be rushed to the home market during the quarantine. This one is really split, as it has 3 dead last votes and equally 3 number 1 votes, and guess what? One of those dead last spots was me. Look, most of the movies on this list just kind of bored me, and whether I watched them or didn't watch them seemed to be about the same thing. But this one actually had me angry at it. It's supposed to be controversial, and I suppose they thought that it would be offensive, but the whole thing just felt like one big ball of cringe to me. They just tried really so hard to be edgy and make some sort of political commentary that it felt so overly obvious that it couldn't help but fail. I know a lot of people out there really enjoyed this one, but I just couldn't wait for it to end. Professor, you felt very different because this was your number 2, so you clearly liked it.
I did. I really liked The Hunt a lot. And part of the reason why is there was a lot of buzz on it early on about it being controversial. And I'm a big believer that when you go to a movie, your expectations play a large part into how much you enjoy it. And I had high expectations, and I felt like while it didn't exceed those expectations, it did meet them. At the end of the day, what I really liked was Betty Gilpin as the star was holding it down. She was, in my opinion, the potential to be the next big horror/action heroine. I think she's awesome in this movie. She really is the big reason why I think I like this movie so much.
The main girl really gave me an Uma Thurman kind of Kill Bill vibe. And then when they were having their showdown there in the kitchen, it reminded me of one of her fights with the Crazy 88s or whatever it was in Kill Bill. So I think that her performance, like Victor was saying, her performance, like once she came into the movie, I was like, oh, I like this movie now, because like the first maybe 20 minutes or so where they were just doing the setup, like killing off the random Republicans, I guess. While that was fun, I was kind of like, where is this movie going? The whole cast is dead. And then when we got to the point where she finally starts like going to the barracks, and there's all those people in there, like the army guy who they hired to be a contractor, and she just starts kicking all their asses. Like I was like, I am definitely down with this movie at this point. I actually had it almost number 2, and it probably honestly could take my number 2 spot, because I had a hard time picking between that and The Wretched. And if I was to make the list again, it very well could even take the number 1 spot.
But what really got to me about it was it tried to be smarter than it was, and tried to pack all of this social commentary and meaning in, but did it in a way that really didn't live up to the hype, and also didn't really make a stance one way or the other, which I guess is fine. But when your cover has like a pig on it and all these things about the hunt, and you're making like references or alluding to like Animal Farm type vibes in your movie, and then you have a scene where a guy has a grenade shoved down the front of his sweatpants, for me, it's like you missed the mark. And so there was so much of that scene where people are being blown up or shot by multiple arrows, but you're still saying you're trying to make a statement. And so again, for me, it just tried to be too smart. It really didn't meet that level.
It started really well. It grabbed me, and I was involved. I was into this. It did a couple of fake outs at the beginning. Okay, who are we following in this movie? Who's our protagonist? No, it's not the blonde chick, because she gets her head blown off very quickly. No, it's not the, as you would say, the discount Donnie Wahlberg. No, it wasn't him. He was dispatched pretty quickly, and then we get, oh, okay, this is our lead. But she was great in it, really, really good. But then I felt the last third of the film, it worked for me with the satirical kind of edge to it, but could have been a little darker, because the movie really did start out that way. And then it kind of went into this Kill Bill face-off between her and Hilary Swank at the end, which, again, it worked, but I don't know. It was a little jarring for me at the end, but overall, a really good movie, and I would recommend it. Pretty good watch.
Heading into the top 3, beating The Hunt by a mere 1 point at 127 points is Gretel and Hansel, from the son of Norman Bates himself. Although it got a few low marks, it was never ranked dead last, and actually got 4 number 1 nods. This one was my number 2, and again, I'll admit that on any other list it wouldn't be this high, but because from a story standpoint, there's just not a lot here. But this is easily the most gorgeous film of the year. This is one of those times that I was just entranced by the imagery on the screen, and I even went back and popped it on a second time soon after, just to get wrapped up in the visuals. Now, Josh, you felt very different. You gave this one a 9.
I think it was just like the aesthetic of the movie. Like, I liked the performance of the girl from It and the little brother, and even the witch, I guess. But I didn't find that any of the CGI in the movie was good. Like, anytime they had any sort of CGI in the movie, it really fell flat for me. It didn't do anything for me. Like, every time it would cut to this alternate room with it was like a younger version of the witch, or another, I kind of forget off the top of my head who it was, but there's like another girl in this big room. I found all the scenes in there weren't very good, and I had a really hard time getting into the movie, and when it was over, I was like, I don't think I'm ever going to watch this movie again. Like,
the script for that movie is not good. Most of the acting in that movie is not good, but it is so gorgeous. It is so aesthetically pleasing that I just don't care about anything else in the movie. It's just like, I was just sitting there grinning at every frame. You know, the score by Rob, his name is just Rob. Such a pleasing movie, and so rare that I love a movie that has a bad script. Bad scripts almost always kill a movie for me, but not that time.
I liked it better than I thought I would, to be honest. The familiar fable with a neat enough twist to keep, hold my interest. The cinematography was fantastic, like dark, grainy. I felt the film had a lot of atmosphere. a lot of creepy, dark atmosphere. And it was kind of, towards the end, I was kind of losing interest, and then it kind of piped up, but not great, not horrible either. I thought, what was the lead's name? Sophie Lillis. She was pretty good in it, as were the two actresses that played the different versions of the witch. But nah, not great, not horrible, but not great.
Our number 2 film is an underdog story, since it was a pretty big flop at the box office after sitting on a shelf for a while, and it's Underwater with 98 points. It was ranked number 1 3 times, although it did manage to get one dead last vote, and that was from our panelist, Uncle Pete. Pete, what was it that you didn't like?
I'm gonna bash her. Kristen Stewart, stone-faced, stoic acting. It's pretty unbearable to watch. All the roles from the Wolf movies and everything else, it's just, I don't think she can act past a blank stare face with no emotion. She emotes nothing, and really just the whole plot of it, it was aliens underwater done poorly with CGI.
This was my number 3, and I covered it in my best films I watched during quarantine video. And yeah, I know that it's basically just alien underwater, but it had enough to keep me engaged, and I'm a big fan of the whole start in the middle and never let up approach. This one really did it for me, and as a Lovecraft fan, how can you not dig that ending?
This one, when I saw the trailers, I'm like, and then started hearing how it had been on the shelf for like 3 years and they were clearly just pushing it out to get it out. I'm just like, but it's an underwater monster movie. And then when I saw it, one of the things I love is something that it got dinged for by some people, which is the movie opens on the inciting incident. You know, it just kicks into gear and doesn't let up. The focus is the tragedy and the survival. It's tightly paced, you know, things happen, and then they give you a little moment to breathe. I liked the cast for the most part. Yeah, T.J. Miller, I can take or leave. And yet I just found myself the whole time, I'm like, okay, I'm having fun. And I never hit that point where I'm like, oh boy, no wonder that sat there.
I didn't really have any expectations. I didn't know that it was on the shelf, you know, like Thom knew going in. You know, with Kristen Stewart, I think I had those low expectations. So the only expectations I had were, I've seen The Huntsman or whatever those other movies are that she's done. I unfortunately was made to sit through the Twilight movies. I just was expecting more of that from her. And maybe she did actually give us more of the same, but it was almost like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, where suddenly a particular acting style fits a character so well. I'm a huge Cthulhu fan. I mean, like, so there, got right up here. I was so happy by the end to see that's where they were going with it. I'm like, I was really, really pleased with that handling of the idea that you could actually, you know, disturb something like that. I thought it set out to do a certain thing. I think it was incredibly successful for me. And by the end, I was just, the end for me is often where a movie loses me, right? I think that's probably a common problem that movies have, but I thought the ending was great. The dismount, nailed it.
And here we go, no surprise here, the number 1 movie on this ranking is also the highest grossing horror film of 2020, and at a mere 62 points, it's The Invisible Man. It did get some lower scores, with its lowest ranking being an 8, but it's the top spot because it was ranked number 1 16 times, including by me. TJ, you seem to really like this as well, since it's your number 2.
I do have it ranked as my number 2. I will admit, it's not a super excited number 2. The whole list, I think out of all of them, I was a bit more excited about this one because it was really well directed, really well written, but overall it did feel a little bit like it was about an hour and 15 minutes of horrible things happening to Elizabeth Moss over and over and over again. With very little, redemption moments or things where she kind of gets back. So you kind of feel like crap by the time she finally gets that moment of redemption. And as much as I felt great at the end of that movie, and I really want to see more, I almost am dying to see The Invisible Woman. I just feel like it was a really well-made but slightly mean-spirited movie which kind of took me out of it a little bit because it lost some of the fun that I wanted to have with it.
I absolutely loved The Invisible Man. I gave it a 4.5 on Letterboxd, and I think it was almost a 5-star, but it's like I want to rewatch it and make sure I feel the same about it on second watch. As someone who moved across the country to get away from an abuser, I really relate to the movie. It's like one of those things where just like every bit of it rings true in terms of the gaslighting and, you know, the manipulation. I mean, I've never had anyone like stalk and literally try to kill me, thankfully, but I really related to the movie and enjoyed it both from that perspective and as a horror movie. And I thought Elizabeth Moss was amazing in it.
Now, Dan, you've got a bit of a different opinion since you've got this slotted as your number 7.
My friend said before I saw it and really knew anything about it, he said it was like a horror movie for Marvel fans. So then I was like, what does it even mean? Like, I didn't even like that he said that about a movie. Like, I get miffed a little bit when people get like kind of tied down by genreification. Mm-hmm. Like, I like that horror is inclusive. Like, I want it to be a horror movie. You know, if it is a horror movie, then throw it in there. But as I watched it, I let his sort of commentary resonate. When we got to the attic, but from that point on, it really became a different feeling movie where it was more about being gaslit, about like mental illness, where she gets committed, and I guess it, like I say, it was about the problem with expectation. So I was expecting one thing and got another. I loved Elizabeth Moss in it. I thought that an actress who wasn't as good as her probably wouldn't have been able to do as well with that. It doesn't even mean that I don't like the movie. I actually just like the 6 above it pretty well.
Now to cap it all off, Noah, you've got this at the top as well. So what did you love about it?
It really just drops you straight into the middle of it with Cecilia escaping from Adrian, and it's just immediately right off the bat you're going 10 out of 10 speed and drama, and it's just already so tense when he comes and smashes through the car window. You already have a great sense of what this guy as the villain is going to be like. And usually when there's movies where it's someone, usually a woman, who's going through something and just no one believes them, like it's not happening, this is actually a way in which that makes sense, and it's a great use of the invisibility throughout the entire time. And I really liked how bleak it was. I enjoyed it not being this fun, campy thing, because I think that would have been an easier way to take something as ridiculous as The Invisible Man.
So there you have it, 10 movies from 2020, some not so great films from a not great in any way year. Now, since these movies represent the highest grossing films of the year, there's plenty of other films from the year that may not be represented. So the question is, what was your favorite film of the year, whether it was on this list or not?
Now, my favorite movie of 2020 was actually a fan film, not a official film. And it is Friday the 13th Vengeance.
It's on this list. I put it at number 1, which was The Hunt.
I think it was a Shudder exclusive called Scare Me.
Underwater.
It was actually Invisible Man, just above Underwater, yeah.
Invisible Man.
Nice. My favorite horror movie of this year was definitely Fear Farm.
I want to say, I think it came out this year. I definitely watched it this year. The Lodge to me was pretty great.
So I racked my brain on this, and oddly enough, I think I'm going to say it was The Platform.
Okay, well, my favorite, it probably has to be Lee Winnell's The Invisible Man.
I would still go with The Invisible Man.
I think it's on Netflix. It was His House.
For me, it was a toss-up between Color Out of Space and this little scene film called Spontaneous that I absolutely loved. I don't know if you'd call that horror or not, but I do. And there it is. There's the ranking. This is one that I guess I mostly agree with, although personally I would rank The Hunt a lot lower, but seeing how people really dug it, I guess it fits. Let me know what you thought of these films down below, what you thought of this ranking, if you would kind of move them around or where you would place them. Let's hear it. Let's hear what you thought of the movies in general. And I want to thank you guys for watching it and sticking with the channel through this. And I want to especially thank all of my panelists. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate you guys for joining this episode. We'll be seeing the patrons again in the future, I'm sure. And these are all people that voted, and these are just my other patrons as well too. These guys are on the channel whether they send in rankings or want to appear in a video or not. Doesn't really matter. Thank you guys. You're all awesome. So thank you, and thank you for watching this video, and we'll see you very, very shortly for another great one. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.